Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we're going to be talking about Faith, the Unholy Trinity. Faith is told in 3 chapters. You don't have to actually complete all 3 of them in order to beat the game. You can play these in any order that you want. But if you want to get one of the better endings, then it's recommended that you beat them in order. This is a pretty fun and creepy story. There are a ton of characters in it, and you jump back and forth in time through the story. It can be a little bit confusing, especially if you're just reading a synopsis of it. When you're playing through it, it makes a little bit more sense. In the first chapter, you play as a priest, you head to this abandoned house, and you deal with a spirit that you have previously dealt with before. It's kind of fun. It has to do with exorcism and that sort of thing. The entire series is really inspired by the satanic panics in the 1980s. In the second chapter, you kind of go back in time, and you switch in between Father Garcia and John Ward. It's interesting, but I don't know, the second one really just wasn't doing it for me. It deals with like a demonic invasion or an attack or something, and I didn't like it as much as the first one. In the third chapter, the events occur over 3 days in October, and you're trying to stop a satanic cult from summoning a demon during the profane Sabbath. It's a nice wrap-up to this trilogy. It's fine for what it is. I like the third one a lot more than the second. And yeah, the whole thing reminds me a little bit of the Exorcist trilogy, where things start off fairly good and then kind of go off the rails in the second one, and then the third one is okay, but nothing amazing. The overall story is a lot of fun. It feels like it was inspired by just a bunch of different horror movies, and yeah, it is pretty cool to see this. It definitely takes a lot of inspiration from the Satanic Panic in the 1980s. It was pretty fun. The gameplay is okay. It feels a lot like I'm playing an Atari 2600 game where the only controls are to move your character around and then pressing the action button to do different things. It works pretty well for a game like this, since it's more about survival than actual combat. Your primary weapon is a crucifix, you do get other weapons throughout the game, and you get a bunch of just random items as well. Some of them end up being very helpful, others you might stumble around a bit before you actually figure out how to use them. It is very similar to other adventure games from the 1980s, particularly the Sierra Online games, where you die a lot and have to start over. Like, you die a lot in this game. It also reminds me of stuff like Dragon's Lair or Space Ace, and just a bunch of those adventure games where you were kind of punished for making a mistake, and then at least you were given an opportunity to start over. It wasn't as horrible as you forgot to pick up this item from, 3 hours ago and you lost the game then, but you didn't know about it. Faith doesn't do that, thankfully. In many ways, it feels a lot like those old point-and-click adventure games where they were just getting graphics into them and just getting it to where you could actually interact with the scenery and whatnot. It's pretty cool. I like it quite a bit. It's not normally something that I would play, but it was quite enjoyable for the amount of time that I put into it. I died an awful lot, so if you're good at this, you probably won't die that much. The graphics were inspired by games from the late 1970s and the early 1980s. When I first started playing this, I thought it looked like an Atari 2600 game, just with how minimal its graphics were. A very good-looking Atari 2600 game, but that was sort of the graphical vibe that I got. When I read more into this, then yeah, it kind of made more sense that they were actually drawing inspiration from games on like the Apple II, the Commodore 64, VIC-20, that sort of thing, where you had more going on than what you could do with the Atari 2600, or at least at the time you could. because of just what it's drawing inspiration from. Some of the graphics are fairly minimal. I thought the deaths were kind of boring when you saw those, because it's just your character gets splatted and that's pretty much the end of them. The cutscenes look really good, though. They look fantastic. I love how it's almost like a rotoscope, where the animation looks really fluid, and it doesn't look like it should be on a computer from that time period, but it just looks really great. I think the cutscenes are probably one of the best parts of the game. The gameplay is fine, but those cutscenes were really cool to see. I really like just the retro art style of all this. It's a wonderful looking game, especially when the cutscenes take place. The simplistic graphics work really well for a game like this, and I just love how creepy everything looks. It's a really fun game to see. It's really great to just play through it and see what you can find in it, because the graphics will just get really creepy at times, and it looks really awesome. Like when you're just wandering around trying to figure out what's going on, and you don't know that a death scene is coming. That's always the fun part with these, where you don't really know something's going to happen, and then it just kind of springs something on you. It's pretty cool. Faith, the Unholy Trinity is a really good collection of games. The graphics and the cutscenes are outstanding, the controls are pretty good, and I just really like the story throughout most of it. The second one was a little weird, but I do like the story in the first two. One thing that I forgot to mention in this is the digitized voice that's in the game. It sounds like something you would have heard in the 1980s from your computer, where it just doesn't sound like a human voice, it just sounds like an early digitized voice, and it adds to some of the creepiness in it. Again, the story reminds me of several horror movies, and, it really is kind of cool. Like something that could have happened during the Satanic Panic in the 1980s if, demons were actually real or anything like that. It's really fun to see developers take themes like this, especially from real events that happened in the past, and just make some pretty enjoyable stories out of them. I like to see games like this. They've become some of my favorites over the last several years. This series is right up there with something like Varney Lake and Mothman 1966 for me. It's really a lot of fun. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.